Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the regular council meeting of October 11th to order. Council, approval of the agenda, please, as presented. Moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Loggins. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Next are our adoption of our council and committee of the whole meeting minutes. We'll do them together. September 12th, committee of the whole, and September 12th, regular council meeting minutes. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Any errors, omissions, or questions regarding the minutes? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And receipt of draft council committee minutes for information. In a block, we have September 26th, the annual municipal tax sale minutes, September 27th, the annual municipal tax sale minutes, and September 28th, the SPA committee meeting minutes. Motion to receive, please.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Loggins. Any discussion or questions on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, opposed, motion's carried. Okay, that takes us into our public question and comment period. If you could please, members of the public, it's any matters on tonight's agenda with the exception of the public hearing that we have, as that has its own public input session. But anything else, please come forward, state your name and address for the record. And if you could also let us know which item you are discussing, it would help us get to the particular report. Ms. Hall, do you mind turning your microphone on?
I should know that by now, shouldn't
Thank you.
I was wondering if I may ask permission or whatever I need to speak to an item from the minutes. I'm looking at page 13, and I'm looking at the report of in-camera resolutions down at the bottom of page 13.
Which, so it'll be the September 12th.
Yes. I find it kind of strange because we've got report of in-camera resolutions there, and the following items were released from the in-camera meeting for public information. And then we have the, wherever they are, on the back of this one, obviously. And these were done in camera, and now they're in the minutes, and technically I think I'm not supposed to be allowed to speak to the minutes, and I thank you for that. But it says here for Otter Point Road update that the CAO enter into negotiations for a lease on the land off of Otter Point Road. That really isn't enough information to for anybody to actually know what they're talking about, because I don't, unless they're really nosy like I am, people haven't actually understood that this lease and perhaps parking spot and whatever is being planned. So I think it should come back into a regular meeting, should it not? Instead of being in the in-camera minutes only. Like when you do a rise and report, I think it should be more detailed for the public.
Okay, I'll look into that.
Thank you very much. Somebody else come up?
Good afternoon. Margarita Dominguez, 2075 Otter Point Road. Last time I was here, we applied for two things regarding Whiffin Spit. The first one wants to do two dog off-leash parties in Whiffin Spit, and to waive the fees of it. The other one I cannot discuss because the minutes are not yet in the agenda, but the two events, yes, I would like to point out that in the minutes the location is not specified, And when you approve it for that specific location. Now, when I send an email today to all your corporate office, they all answer that that is a decision from the corporate office and not from you, which means I don't understand because I really want to do it. We really want to do it in Whiffen Spit. That is a place for the dogs. Where else can we do it? Which I would like if you can rectify the minutes by adding the location, please.
Okay, we have adopted that, but the minutes and the discussion was on the webcast, and I think everyone at the table here understands it's Whiffen
What
Spit.
minutes? Yeah, but the minutes for the events, you accepted to waive the fees, and the events that you approved, they were for Whiffen Spit.
Yeah, I think council is fully aware of that.
Well, the corporate office say that no, that they look at the video, and the video say that no, that there is no location specified. And I completely remember bringing the off-leash park issue twice.
Okay.
Two different things, which I would really like if you can add the location to those minutes, please.
Okay, we have adopted them already, so, but I'll...
But I sent 2 emails in
Okay,
4 days.
I got it. I'll look into that, okay?
Thank you very much.
Hello. My name is Kevin Wenstop. I live at 866 Finnis Arm Road, and I own the property on Idlemore Road, known of as 2050 and 2040. I'm here. I was talking to Brent in finance, and I was hoping that there'd be something coming up at this meeting today. That's why I came on the agenda regarding mill rates for industrial properties and stuff, because my taxes have gone up dramatically over the last 3 years. And so I'm here to put a bug in an ear and then come back at the next meeting with a lot of good information or maybe bad information, and hoping that council will be able to look at some form of tax relief, because I currently have only built about 15% out on my project, and my rate is about $70,000 a year. When I'm built out, it'll be over $500,000 a year in taxes. And for a chainsaw, that doesn't quite cover the taxes.
The item that the public Q&A is specifically for items on the agenda, so we don't have the industrial mill rate on the council agenda this night. However, we are having 2 open forums next week. There's my town hall, mayor's town hall on Monday, as well as a discussion with staff on the Thursday. And then from this point on, we will be entering into our budget deliberations, of which there'll be more time to have the conversation that you're having. But the public Q&A is specific to the agenda. But I think we have all heard what you said, so it is certainly we can take into consideration.
That's why I said it. So I'm here to say what I said, and I'll continue on later.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome first speak-time speakers up first, please, if there's any. Okay, come forward, please.
The forum that you are talking about, do they have an agenda? We can talk, ask the questions that we want.
There is no, because I brought it up, I'll mention my town hall. There is no agenda. It's an completely open format.
Okay. And the other thing is, in the agenda today is approving the minutes that last time we asked. You say that the homeless and the soup kitchen and the housing project, all that, it will be discussed, and in this moment is under study.
That's on Thursdays. There'll be a discussion on housing on Thursday at the Talktober event.
Okay, because it's cold outside.
Yes, it's getting
Thank you.
cool. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to address council on tonight's agenda? Okay, so we'll move on and move into our public hearing. Oh, Ms. Hall? Okay. Okay. Okay, so that brings us to our public hearing, and I believe we have a Planning Department report and presentation. Welcome, Ms. Johnston.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. The public hearing today is to rezone 6557 Clairview Road from large lot residential, R1, to low-density multifamily, RM1. The area to be rezoned is approximately 1,416 square meters, and it is within the sewer specified area. The subject property is designated community residential in the official community plan, which supports a variety of housing types and residential infill. The lands surrounding are single-family residential. Mariners Village is located to the west, and the subject property is in walking distance to amenities in the town center. The developer has proposed a 2-story fourplex. The form of development will provide an attractive transition to a higher density in a predominantly single-family neighborhood while respecting views to the harbor. 2 letters have been received in regards to this application. There was concern about the density and whether the lot could support 7 dwelling units. The property is 0.14 hectares and at a maximum density of 30 dwelling units per hectare. The density would equal 4.2. And since in our zoning bylaw we don't round up, the maximum density of dwelling units would be 4. The current zoning of large lot residential does not permit a fourplex, and that's why the owner is rezoning to low density multifamily. And there were a few parking concerns. The parking requirements in the zoning bylaw for an RM1 zone would fall under medium density multifamily, which requires 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. So the owner would be required to provide 6 parking spaces on the property. And to clarify permitted uses within the RM1 zone, a bed and breakfast is not permitted, and a limited home-based business is a permitted use, but as defined in the zoning bylaw, there cannot be any traffic generation within a limited home-based business, so no clients or customers are permitted to visit the site of the business, so there will be no additional parking traffic as a result. And in regards to the stormwater concerns, these will be dealt with through Bylaw 404, which is the subdivision and development standards bylaw at time of building permit. There are no structures on the subject property, with the exception of an old foundation from a carport, and a large portion of the property has been cleared with the exception of some trees along the eastern property line. The future development will be subject to a site-specific geotechnical study and a development permit that will address form and character, parking requirements, and landscaping. Overall, the rezoning application is consistent with the policies and objectives of the official community plan, and the applicant is here to address any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. Any questions from council to staff? Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to staff, a couple of questions on this property. The first is one of the requirements is to have a hammerhead on the road. That hammerhead would butt up against what appears to be a walkway. So I would expect that that area would not be allowed for parking.
Through the chair, we will not restrict any current access that is there. So parking will not block that area.
Thank you. The second question I have is the water issue. So where that walkway is between the identified piece of property and the neighboring property to the east, there is that walkway. But I was there today and I noticed that there's a fair amount of erosion that goes down to the water between those two pieces of property. And there isn't any sort of, as a matter of fact, a gentleman that wrote the letter, I spoke with him today. I see him here in the gallery, Mr. Nicholson. And he's been trying to divert the water down to stop the erosion. So would when you're talking about the water, the storm water, would that be taken in, excuse me, into account as to what's currently happening between those two properties?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Ray, we can look at it in consideration of the requirement for a drainage study that's going to be incumbent upon the applicant. I'm not familiar with Mr. Nicholson, was it, or the issues that he has, but we can certainly look at it in consideration of what's being proposed there.
If I can just add, it's for both properties, because I was standing there and you can see the erosion occurring at the very bottom of the applicant's property. So it's just, you know, you can see how the water is taking that whole bank along the whole area. It's not just Mr. Nicholson's property, but the neighbors, the applicants today. So I just wanted to raise the issue of the erosion and the water problems on that hill, because of course everything coming down Sooke is all headed towards the water, and it looks like it's creating quite a bit of erosion as well. Thank you.
Other questions from member of council? Okay, so we'll move into the public hearing portion. There's just a statement that I will read as we do so. This public hearing is being held pursuant to the Local Government Act. At this public hearing, any person who believes that their interest in property is being affected by the proposed bylaw will be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the bylaw that are the subject of this hearing. Copies of written submissions received to date are available, and they are in package number 2. It is important that all who speak at this hearing restrict their remarks to matters contained in the bylaw, and it is my responsibility as chair of this hearing to ensure that all remarks are so restricted. For those of you who wish to speak at the appropriate time, please commence your address to council by clearly stating your name and home address. Then you may give us the benefit of your views concerning the proposed bylaw. Submissions must be received before or during this public hearing in order to be considered by council. Members of council may, if they so wish, ask questions of you following your presentation or submission. However, the main function of council members this evening is to listen to the views of the public. It is not the function of council at this public hearing to debate the merits of the proposed bylaw with individual citizens. Everyone who deems his or her interest in property to be affected shall be given the opportunity to be heard at this meeting. No one will be or should feel discouraged or prevented from making his or her views known. Please note that this hearing forms part of our regular council meeting and as such is being video recorded. Videos and their contents, including any personal information disclosed during this hearing, will be posted on the district's website. So with that, I would like to welcome anyone forward to speak in regards to Bylaw 652. Please, sir, if you could please come forward and take a seat, and we just need your name and address for the record, and you'll need to turn the microphone on. The one...
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is John Nicholson, and my address is 2008 Solnit Street. I'm the adjacent property to Mr. Sofa's development. I sent a letter to council and to Mr. Sofa, and staff have it as well, outlining 4 concerns that I have. I tried to pick up what, I can't see this lady's name, Tara, was saying. I got some of it, so some of it sounds good and some of it I missed. But if you wouldn't mind, councillors, to just take a look at what I read, or excuse me, what I wrote, and I'm here, I think I tried to make it very clear, and if there's any questions, I'd be pleased to answer rather than just repeating what I've already given. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson, and for providing the written submission.
Ellen Lewis, 5526 Sooke Road. I just have a few questions. In the fourplex, does it allow suites within the fourplexes?
Through the chair, no, it does not.
It does not. So that's 6 parking lots in total?
That's correct, 6 parking spaces.
6 parking spaces. So the fourplex, but if there's 4 buildings, it could have more than 2 cars per unit.
Through the chair, the zoning bylaw requires 1.5 spaces per unit. So there's at least 1, or I guess 2, 1.5 per unit. And the extra could be for guest parking or a resident.
I just bring that up is because that's been an issue, as we all know. It's an issue in Sooke. There's always 2 cars at least, possibly 3, depending on how many teenagers end up in your home. So I just wouldn't like us to, maybe that's something to look at as well in our zoning changes, is how many cars we allow per home, because there's cars, doesn't matter where you go, there's cars all over the streets. There's just not enough room. A question with the water, is that storm water or is it a creek? That with the water erosion?
I believe staff had addressed that it had to do with stormwater. Is there anything further that staff would like to add?
Your worship, through to the Ms. Lewis, yeah, it's stormwater. One of the requirements will be an engineered stormwater plan to show us how they are going to control the water runoff from not only Clairview Road but the development itself.
Okay, because part of the OCP, what the discussion is with the OCP, or what we asked in the OCP, is that you'd enhance areas that are water runoffs or creeks and things, instead of covering them up and making it like it's not there. So it's enhancing it, making it a feature, if you will. What was the other one? I guess with the proximity to the ocean, the stormwater that runs off there, is the stormwater treated, or is it water from the road, or how does that work?
Your worship, the stormwater management plan will show the volume of water and how it will be treated and how it will be dispersed, whether it's over the bank in a drop structure or contained and through an orifice, whatever the engineer decides is the best way to do it. We will evaluate it on site and deal with the recommendations of the report at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lures. Are there other members of the public that would like to comment? Would the applicant like to add anything to the report? Call for a second time for members of the public. Okay. Mr. Nicholson, if you could please turn on the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Nicholson.
John Nicholson. On the parking, where I live, which is the 2008, that is a 10-lot subdivision. And as Mrs. Lures mentioned, the 1.5 cars doesn't really work, because most people have 2 cars. Most people have a 2-income family. And the requirement of 1.5 cars, I did not see that in the zoning bylaw. When I was taking a look at the zoning bylaw, when I was reading this, I saw that for the existing zoning, which is R1, it's 2 parking spaces per vehicle, per dwelling unit. And Mr. Sofa's requirement or desire, I believe, is to have 2 duplexes. To do that, he has to change his zoning to RM1. With the RM1 zoning, if you take a look at their parking requirements in your bylaw 600, there is no parking requirement stated for RM1 zoning. It is silent. So from my perspective, if 1 duplex requires 2 spaces, then 2 duplexes should require 4 spaces. And I'm speaking from experience on this. I've lived there basically 30 years. It was all basically large lot residential before the sewer came in. When the sewer came in, the 10 lots became buildable lots. And the council of the day allowed duplexes on those lots. So it's quite a high density And if you take the time to go down there, especially on a weekend or after work, you're going to see lots of cars on the road. And it's not attractive. When I take a look at my assessment, this year on the assessment notice, they gave the past 5 years the value of your property. Past 5 years, the value of my property has been going down. Not really what you want to see when you're looking at kind of a home that maybe might be the last thing you're going to buy in as a kind of investment for your retirement. So I would like, some clarification on the 2 parking, because I did not see that in the zoning bylaw that it was required or is reduced to 1.5 at the RM1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. I'll get clarity from staff, but my understanding is that the applicant is not applying for 2 duplexes, but for 1 fourplex. And so in that regard, the 1.5 parking requirement kicks in, but perhaps staff could just reaffirm that and perhaps note where the parking component is located in the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, through your chair. In the zoning bylaw, if a use is not specifically listed under the parking requirements, the number of spaces is calculated on the basis of a similar use that is listed. And in this case, for residential, we have a section that is for single family / duplex / manufactured home, and that's 2 spaces per dwelling unit. And then we have one for residential, which is multifamily, and we say medium density and high density multifamily. So that is the closest use. It is a multifamily use, a fourplex, which is not permitted in a single family residential zone. So that's why the 1.5 dwelling units kicks in.
Yeah, that's why the parking requirement is the 6 stalls, 4 with an additional 2, 4, yeah. Okay. So I'll call for a final time if there's any questions or comments from members of the public.
I have a question to that. So is there a fourplex?
Ms. Lurs, can you just restate your name? The microphone's on.
5526 Sooke Road, Ellen Lurs.
Thank you.
Is there a fourplex in the zoning bylaw?
Through the chair, a fourplex in the zoning bylaw is essentially a 4-unit townhouse. So it falls under the definition of townhouse. And a townhouse is permitted within a multifamily zone.
So why isn't it like 2 duplexes? Just saying with what Mr. Nicholson said, it's like 2 duplexes. Why is it a townhouse?
A duplex is a 2-dwelling unit. And if you had 2 duplexes on the property, they would be separate. And when they're joined by a common wall, it becomes a townhouse, and in this case, a fourplex.
So the question is, what size are they? How many bedrooms are on each one? Like that's.
I don't believe we get into that level of detail.
No.
It's a fourplex, so the design is going to be, you don't go around and to everyone's house and ask, so
yeah,
it's kind of intrusive.
I understand, but when you're building a single-family home, and if it's a duplex or a fourplex, is it for 2 people? Is it for 4 people? Is it a 4-bedroom duplex? So because it does reflect then, of course, what you're looking at for vehicles.
But either way, if let's say we have a fourplex and 12 cars moved in, then we can't enforce our zoning bylaw that the parking exceeds. Like, there is only 6 stalls. But if you have 10 people living there and there's only 4 cars and 10 are left because the other members are sharing a car using transit or are not in need of a vehicle, I mean, that's what we're trying to introduce, is to encourage other modes of transportation. And certainly the proximity of this development, you could use alternative forms. That's sort of the shift that has been in place for quite some time. May not be happening at the moment, but that is, I think, what everyone is desiring to get to. But I don't think we can knock on people's doors and ask them. I mean, that's almost a senseless.
No,
related
I'm not
question.
saying that.
Just-
I'm just saying because of how many vehicles. Because it's the same with any house that's been built. I mean, you drive around Sun River and there's suites in every home, and you've got
There isn't
cars
suites in every home.
Okay, almost every home. There's a lot of vehicles on the roads in Sun River, for instance, parked on the road because of no parking spaces. It's like that. You go up any of the subdivisions where now there's suites allowed and there's cars everywhere. I'm just looking at this to make sure that we're not putting in another situation where there's more cars than what we can put. And yes, you can talk about we'd like to have people not using their cars, but a reality is when you're going to the city, unless
I
you
hear what
provide
you're
something,
saying, Ms.
that's another
Lewis,
thing.
But the zoning bylaw requires 1.5 stalls.
Well, that's
and
my
the applicant
yeah.
has met that criteria. So it's up to council now, as this moves forward, whether or not we're going to meet that. But it
Well-
has been vetted through staff. And so I think the issue is when we look at re-examining the zoning bylaw, then that is something to address at that time. But we've reviewed it many times in the past few years. The applicant is not asking for a variance. He's met the requirements for parking.
So a townhouse then is 1.5 parking spaces. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So, and that's enforced everywhere then?
We haven't necessarily enforced it everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, call for a final time if there's any members of the public that would like to comment on bylaw 652. Okay, seeing none, I will now close the public hearing and ask council how they would like to move forward. Let's see here. We've moved first and second, so council, would you like to consider third reading of bylaw 652? Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Berger. Discussion on the motion, and that is that council grant third reading to bylaw number 652, zoning amendment bylaw 600-34, to rezone the property located at 6557 Clairview Road from large lot residential zone R1 to low density multifamily 1 zone RM1. Councillor Pearson.
Yes, thank you for the presentation tonight. And this is one of these places where the parking bylaw and the multifamily kind of gets a little gray for us, right? And it's the it's designed for the 40 or 50 units, and then we put 1.5 per unit and things like that. But anyways, a couple of things that I want to be cognizant of is the parking again for that neighborhood. It comes up all the time down there, and we want to make sure that we have adequate parking, because as you can see that there's this small access, and it was in one of the letters to us tonight, is there's a small access, and then we just want to make sure that even during construction that doesn't get blocked off, which is a great wish. But transition properties between high density and low density are those key pieces of property. How do you transition between a residential neighborhood and then a major development like that we have next door to you there? So again, it's key that we do the right things in the right places, and I think that a fourplex in this area, we call it a fourplex, but it's not really, because we don't have fourplexes apparently, is a good transition. So I'm going to support the development. Being cognizant of the fact that parking has got to be on our minds in all of these areas, particularly where there was a subdivision made 60 or 70 or 100 years ago where there's 10 lots. So thank you.
Other comments? Councillor Parkinson.
My concern was the same as Councillor Pearson's in regards to parking, because all the side streets on the small streets in the center of town get very congested, and it's hard for two-way traffic to go down there. So we just have to make sure when we look at all the developments that there is enough parking and that fire trucks or larger vehicles can get through too. Thank you.
Councillor Loggins.
I am just echoing what other councillors have said, but I do think it's important to echo that this area will be built out over time, and if we don't think about the parking issues now, it will get worse and worse over time. And if anyone's driven past my place on Maple, you'll know exactly what it might look like. It's not great. So perhaps it's something we should revisit in the future, but I do support this development at this time.
Anything further from members of council? Call the question then on third reading. All of those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay. So moving into our bylaws section, bylaw B1. Basically, this is a recommendation that council adopt bylaw 646, zoning amendment bylaw 631.
Move recommended action.
Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ray. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Item B2, and that's that council adopt bylaw 638, zoning amendment bylaw 600-33.
Move recommended action.
Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Bylaw B3, that's bylaw 649, that council adopt bylaw 649, Sooke course sewer specified area amendment bylaw 147-28. Moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Ray. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. Number 4, that council adopt bylaw number 650, Sooke course sewer specified area amendment bylaw 147-29. Moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. B5, that council adopt bylaw 651, Sooke course sewer specified area amendment bylaw 147-30. Moved by Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Ray. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Okay, that brings us to B6, bylaw 653, future policing costs reserve bylaw. And I believe we have a report in front of us and a staff report. Mr. Blackall, our Director of Finance, is presenting. Thank you.
Yes, Your Worship. So the report's on page 59, and it's a short report. It's basically just trying to beef up reserve for future policing costs and using the traffic fine sharing grant that we get as a source. Since we drafted that report, you'll see that the actual bylaw is a little more in detail as to how to manage that reserve, the new reserve. On page 62 at the top. You'll see that it would just be keeping the balance in between 10 and 20% of the total expenditures with the RCMP contract. So the RCMP contract this year is $1.7 million. Next year projected to be 1.85, I think it was. So we're looking at 180 to 360,000 that would be in that reserve. So.
Councillor Pearson.
Yes, when I saw that, it was somewhere in our communication some time ago about the traffic fine sharing. I think we get 86,000 or 86K or something like that. What's the historical view on that? I guess if we're going to add a police officer, is that what's the past 5 years look like? Do you know? Through the chair. Sorry.
Through the chair, I'm not sure. I 100% follow your question, but I believe, it has, traditionally the grant has been that amount. The cost of an officer, it is higher than that amount, arguably. And we've been funding it basically out of general revenues and taxations.
And the reason I asked the question is I just didn't want to get a false sense of security that, that it's not costing us a lot. Like, is this a one-time windfall? At 86K, which is nice. I mean, we get the 86K to help us offset police costs. I just wanted to make sure that historically we're not looking at 20, 20, 20, and then 86, it's jumped up because a bunch of people got caught or something.
Through the chair. Yeah, it's we're just looking at this as a good source for funding the reserve because it's actually traffic fine related revenues. And with the keeping the credit balance in the reserve in between 10 and 20%. That's how we're going to manage how much goes into there. And we generally know well in advance of how much needs to go in there for the next coming year. So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Parkinson.
Through you, Your Worship, what is the percentage of the traffic fine revenues that the district receives from it? Is it like 50%? Do we get half of it, or does it fluctuate?
Through the chair, it's a per capita basis. So I didn't bring the report with me tonight, but it's based on each population of the area. So we don't get 50% of it by any means.
Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Your Worship. So just to be clear, this is a reserve, because you say a major RCMP expenditure. Are we anticipating anything outside of the hiring and the cost? Like, I'm not quite sure what we would actually use it for.
Through the chair, we're not anticipating anything major, any significant items other than if we're trying to increase the number of members here. So really, we pay for the members, we pay for the accommodation. So all the the space and the furniture and everything that's in there, it's all paid on a 70% basis. Once Sooke's population, if it ever did reach that next threshold, then you're at 100%. But so
thank you.
Question I have is, do we belong to the Vancouver Island Major Crime Unit? Because that would be an unanticipated major cost in the event of a homicide that occurs and resulting in a death and an investigation within our community. We would need to cover off that. So I was recently advised that recently in Langford, it was a straightforward investigation involving 2 suspects, and it was roughly $600,000. But Langford is a part of the Vancouver Island Major Crime Unit, so it was covered through that program. This is now being reviewed by the province, and they are looking at coming up with a new formula. I got an update at the Mayor's Caucus recently where they're looking at your homicide rate within the community, their crime rate, the population, and then they would calculate out a new formula, but the model hasn't been completely finalized. We expect probably by April at the AVICC they may have something crystallized on how they're going to address this on the island. But at the moment, do we belong to VIMQ?
Better question for the sergeant, but we do certainly see increased costs for investigations like that. So I imagine that means we're part of that. We're also part of the regional, Crime Stoppers and all these other programs that we do get billed for as well.
Okay, I think if we could look into that, because I think it's not a matter of what we pay out to the RCMP. I think it was something separate that each municipality would enter into on their own. I don't think it's attached to what we pay out to the RCMP. It's something separate. So I believe our staff sergeant is away on leave at the moment, but if there's a way of just finding, I think it's just important to know either way. Not that I'm expecting anything to happen, but an unanticipated, I think that's where our reserve, and maybe that was the sense that we don't pay into that because we're building a reserve. I don't know. It's been on my mind to ask that question. So.
I think it's a good point for us to bring up with the sergeant, and we'll, if a tweak is needed to the wording in the bylaw, right there, we could tweak it to say, instead of RCMP contract expenditures, it could say if people want policing expenditures, including not only the contract but these other regional items that we may get hit with.
Okay. Councillor Ray, then Pearson.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just looking at the budget for the protective services under policing, and that's not part of it. We've got the integrated mobile crisis and the integrated domestic violence, and we were part of the regional major crime, but not, collapsed. And that's collapsed. So what you're talking about for a homicide, I don't think we, so that would be a great place to put some money aside.
Councillor Pearson.
Move first reading.
Second.
Okay, move first reading by Councillor Pearson and seconded by Councillor Ray. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, opposed, carried unanimously. Move second reading by Councillor Pearson and seconded by Councillor Loggins. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, opposed, motion is carried unanimously. Move third reading by Councillor Ray and seconded by Councillor Pearson. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blackhall. Okay, moving on to item B7. This is bylaw 654, permissive tax exemption bylaw amendment, and there is a fairly straightforward report. Any questions from members of council about the report? Move first reading by Councillor Parkinson and seconded by Councillor Loggins. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. And second reading? Second by Councillor Loggins and seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. And move third reading by Councillor Loggins and seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Any discussion on third reading? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried unanimously. And looking for a motion to direct staff to publish notice as to bylaw 654 in accordance with sections 227 and 94 of the Community Charter. Moved by Councillor Parkinson and seconded by Councillor Pearson, I believe. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. Okay, this brings us into our reports requiring action. RA1, equipment purchase for the fire department. And welcome. The report is through Chief Cameron. We have a written report, and I'll hand it over to you.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Thank you for inviting me here tonight. This report deals with one of the things I was tasked when I was brought on board as part of the management team to review, and that was critical equipment needed for the fire department in the budget year 2016, as it was my understanding that funding was put in abeyance pending a report on this matter. I can report to council that a review has been conducted of necessary 2016 equipment purchases and a prioritization of the critical equipment required for the fire department in this current budget year. This report also further goes into detail of how we can start doing some proper equipment planning. I think that's a little bit been lacking in the past, and this report attempts to start that process. So it's two parts for council tonight. One, looking for approval of some funding for this year for some critical equipment, but knowing full well, based on this report, that we're trying to push some of this out to make it financially palatable and also get the equipment in a timely fashion with updated technology as the case may be. The current item is for replacement of some self-contained breathing apparatus air cylinders. This is a very critical item. I cannot stress it enough. All the cylinders within the fire department, except for 4, will expire in the year 2018. And effectively, if we don't replace those cylinders, we are out of the firefighting business because we will have no ability to wear our breathing apparatus. I have proposed in the plan to request $9,600 in 2016 for 6 bottles, given the fact that we have already purchased 4 this year, giving us a total of 10. And 10 bottles in the year 2017 and 2018 will give us 100% replacement on the current inventory of the air cylinders. The second most important part of this unit is the actual self-contained breathing apparatus, the full units themselves. These are the pieces of apparatus that the firefighters wear on their backs to breathe clean air when they're fighting your fires. They are very, very expensive, but they are a high-tech piece of equipment. And we have 18 of those units presently in service. They were all purchased at the same time. So unfortunately, the maintenance on them is all coming due at the same time. And they're 14 years old now. And as these units get older, there is no expiry date on them, but you start chasing good money with bad trying to maintain these units beyond the 15-year mark up to the 20-year mark. So it is recommended to keep your maintenance costs down, that we start replacing these units at 5 units per year. It makes it sort of more of a bite-sized chunk that we can get a hold of, as opposed to being faced with a very high bill in the year 2020 of some $250,000 worth of equipment required. So that has been phased in over a 5-year plan. The other advantage of doing this is we can take advantage of the technology changes. If we buy 5 a year, which will outfit 1 truck each year going forward, we take advantage of the new technologies that come out, so you can afford your firefighters the best technology that the money can buy at the time, as opposed to having buying them all at once and having that technology outdated within 3, 4, 5 years. So I would encourage you to consider that, but please know full well this is based on a plan moving forward that we need to replace 20 units at approximately $49,000 in each of the next budget years. The other 3 items, the ventilation saws. These are a specific saw used for forcible entry and ventilations of roofs. The 2 saws that we want to replace are very well used and are problematic from time to time. And these types of saws need to work first time every time. There's no ability for us to step aside and hope the saw works on the 4th or 5th pull. These saws, when you're ventilating or doing forcible entry, must work first time every time. The item number 4 is for replacement of 2 contractor-grade chainsaws, and of course that is just as it sounds, regular chainsaws that we use for cutting through walls or cutting trees across road. And we have a number of these chainsaws in service, and again, 2 are well past their prime and creating us issues with maintenance issues. And the final one is replacing a ventilation fan. The fan we're replacing is some 20 years old. It's a gas-powered unit, creates carbon monoxide, and when we're trying to put fresh air into a building, we are putting carbon monoxide into it. The new fan is a new hybrid electric fan and is much better suited for the purpose that we wish. The problem with the old fan is they don't tell you when they're about to let go. These fans run at a very, very high RPM, and when they start making a noise, they're imminent to basically implode. So we have 2 of these in the department, one at Station 1 and one at Station 2, and they are an integral part of our fire attack, introducing fresh air into a building for our firefighters. I'm sure you've seen in past years, there's always the list that comes from the fire department of necessary equipment and things that we need to do our job. That's kind of a bit of a fact of life. I think it's proper to present it to you in a phased plan that's affordable, that gives us the latest technology, and I can guarantee you, this council tonight, that those 5 items are not frivolous items. They're very much needed by the fire department, and particularly the first 2. If you don't start addressing those 2 issues now, you're going to be faced with either being out of service in 2 short years, or you're going to be faced with a very large bill all at once. So, having said that, I've given you a breakdown on each one of the items. I'm sure you've read the report. There is one typographical error I apologize for on page 5. It says items 1 through 4. It should be items 1 through 5, which is as a result of trying to do a chart for you to make it more self-explanatory. So I'm pleased through the chair to ask any question or answer any questions from council.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Councillor Pearson, then Ray.
I have a couple of questions. Thank you, Acting Chief, through the chair. I like the phased approach, and I like that you've put it on a little bit of a spreadsheet here that shows that if we take a phased-in approach, that it's more affordable for us. One of the things I like to see is that we have a couple of local suppliers potentially for some of the items here, and I'm always cognizant of the fact that some of our local suppliers are also taxpayers, and I like to see us at least source or price those items out locally as opposed to shopping for them elsewhere. So through the chair to Mr. Blackhall, I guess he's in the background there, do we have the money for this for 2016?
Through your worship, we currently have the fire equipment reserve is being planned as a source for this. That reserve gets topped up, is meant to be topped up in the budget year, 100,000. We started at 107, and we had 23 in the plan, so there is enough. After all of that and this 70, there would still be 114 left in the reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ray.
Thank you, through your worship. My question to the Director of Finance as well. My recollection is that we did put some of the money we moved some of the money. Did it go into the fire reserve or did it not go into contingency?
Through you, Your Worship, the money that was put into the council contingency at the budget stage was operational items. Okay. It wasn't any capital items.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, well, first of all, I'd like to thank the acting fire chief for the report. Very concise and to the point in terms of what you need, so I do appreciate that. I'll be supporting all of the items. I just need to know from the Director of Finance if we will need to do an amendment to our financial plan that we submitted.
Through you, Your Worship, yes, because this will be an increased spending in the reserve than what was in the budget. Yeah, this is an opportune time to amend the plan for this item and others. So.
Okay, Councillor Parkinson.
I'd like to move the recommendation.
Okay, so there is a recommendation on the screen. Can we do this in one full move? Okay, so Councillor Parkinson, you're moving the entire both items as stated? Okay. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Loggins, did you have a comment or question?
Just a quick comment. I wanted to thank the acting fire chief for the report. I really appreciate the detail and the foresight in that, and I really mean that. Thank you.
Okay, anything further from council? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Is carried unanimously. Thank you, and thank you, Chief.
Your Worship, thank you for your support of your volunteer fire department. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to our final item, correspondence for information, I-1. That's correspondence received from September 8th through to October the 3rd. Moved receipt by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Loggins. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? This carried unanimously. And finally, a motion to adjourn the open session and to return to in camera. Moved by Councillor Ray and seconded by Councillor Loggins. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you.